Hello everyone. Welcome to The Quest for the Cures Continues. My name's Ty Bollinger and I'm going to be your host. I'm so glad that you've tuned in tonight because this program, this docu-series for the next 11 days is for you. Whether you're just trying to prevent cancer, whether you have a loved one or a child with cancer, or whether you've been personally diagnosed with cancer, you deserve to know all of your options. If you remember back in the spring, we aired The Quest for the Cures, in which I traveled across the country interviewing doctors and researchers and cancer patients to find out exactly what they are doing to treat their cancer naturally. Because of your support, we've continued our journey and traveled to Houston, Frisco, LA, Washington, D.C., Detroit, all across the USA, and interviewed another 22 doctors and scientists. We now have 51 of the most renowned doctors, scientists, and survivors who are breaking their code of silence and will be sharing with you these next 11 days about natural treatments for cancer. And we've learned more information about these natural treatments that mitigate cancer. According to the World Health Organization, 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women alive today will face a cancer diagnosis. I lost my entire family to cancer. In 1996, my father, Graham Bollinger, was diagnosed with stomach cancer. He was 52 years old, and he died in 25 days from the surgery. After that, my grandfather, my uncle, my cousin, my grandmother, another grandfather, and then eventually my mother in 2004 died of cancer. Now, I'm doing what I'm doing because of them. My passion is to share this information with you so that you can be able to make an informed decision if you face that cancer diagnosis. The time came where I had to leave my family, and it was such a blessing because they completely supported me in this mission. It wasn't my mission, it was our mission. It was my wife's, it was my children's. We all shared this mission. And so while it was painful to be separated from them, it was something that was necessary in order to accomplish this goal. And so it was a bittersweet time when I had to say goodbye to my family, but we knew that our goal, that our purpose was much greater than this. When my dad was diagnosed with cancer, I just didn't understand how a man that was seemingly healthy at 52 years old could die in 25 days after the surgery. I didn't understand how modern medicine could still be operating in what seemed like the dark ages.
Yeah, so there are dark ages. So medicine, we are beginning to have dark ages, and less people will take some action.
Why is it that we're living in the dark ages? Could it be because of medical school curriculum? I traveled down the road to Seguin, Texas, to talk to my college roommate, Dr. Irvin Sani. So talk about med school. When you went through medical school, how much nutritional training did you get?
Pretty much none. Pretty much none.
Pretty much none? How can it be that doctors receive almost no education on nutrition and diet while in medical school? Could Dr. Sani be the only one with this story?
In medical school, we have like 30 minutes of nutrition where they tell us don't give sugar to the diabetic, don't give salt to the hypertensive patient, and give a lot of fiber to those that are constipated. And that's it.
That's what they taught you.
So doctors don't know anything about nutrition.
No one's interested in talking to you about losing weight. No one's interested in talking to you about quitting smoking. We do that a little bit, and there's actually codes for quitting smoking. There's some little fine nuances there, but the bottom line is there's no real incentive to promote true health. And there is an incentive to write lots of prescription medications by the way the system is designed.
A common theme that I'm hearing, medical doctors, while brilliant people, are just not taught about nutrition and overall health when they're in medical school. They're basically taught to prescribe a pill for every ill. Why is this so? In order to get the answer to that question, we're going to have to go back in time about 100 years for a history lesson. You see, if we're going to change where we're going, we need to know where we've been. And that's why history is so important. Because as the old saying goes, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. I had to talk to Dr. Robert Scott Bell, who's a homeopathic doctor and also a historian. It was time to begin our history lesson. I saw you recently on Fox News. You talked about a monopoly of modern medicine, and you went into the history of modern medicine.
Yeah.
If you could, for the viewers here, go into a brief 5-minute history of modern medicine. How did we get to where we are today?
Yeah, this is an interesting thing, that a history that is not taught. And part of my interest in this subject, not only because of my own health challenges, but once I uncovered the fact that I was lied to about my health and my body and health and medicine in general, I began to question just about everything that I was taught. And as I uncovered these different areas of inquiry, I found out indeed there's an official story about these things, including the official story of modern medicine. We're raised as if it's always been here, it's always been this way, and the only doctors you could consult are medical doctors that prescribe patent medicines approved by the Federal Food and Drug Administration, that I often call the Fear and Death Administration, because of the promotion of products that are in fact the leading cause of death, not the third, second, but the first, in fact, when you start taking it all into account. So looking back at the history, I became intrigued as to how did we get here? How did we get here? And that opened up a huge can of worms. Now, as a homeopath, eventually I learned about many things in history that we were not taught, and even including the fact that in the Civil War, the war between the states, some describe it as the War of Northern Aggression, depending on your historical perspective, you would go, even today, you go to a Civil War museum in the South, and it is fascinating that you will find in the medical field kits, the little kits that they have, first aid kits, they all had homeopathic medicine in there. I was steeped in the tradition growing up a lot of my years in the South in the Civil War. Never once did we ever acknowledge that there was anything like that in these kits, much less herbal medicine. And so there was a whole history that was hidden from me. Now, eventually I was introduced to Harris Coulter. He wrote a series of books called Divided Legacy. I mean, these are books you can work out with. You can become big like you, Ty. And it's just incredible the history that was hidden from us about the schism between what we call homeopathic and naturopathic thought forms versus allopathic thought forms, where they poisoned the body using mercury and different things. And that's where Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, who was a physician in his day in the late 18th and early 19th century, determined that the medicine that he was giving his patients was more harmful than the disease. And he couldn't stomach that, and that's where he was motivated to develop a system that became a broad-based worldwide system called homeopathy, utilizing small quantities or amounts of naturally occurring substances from the mineral, animal, and plant kingdoms. And in this way, there was a growth around the world out of Germany of this new form of medicine. Now, eventually, there was a schism because there was an emerging field of what we call patent petrochemical medicines based on the Rockefeller-type oil monopoly that had already established in the energy sector that was growing. They started finding out through organic chemistry that they can alter these oil-based molecules into all kinds of things. And they developed these patented drugs or drug molecules.
Dr. Bell talked about pharmaceutical drugs and the fact that doctors lean heavily towards prescribing drugs. Why is this? I wanted to go get the opinion of another well-known researcher. So I traveled out to California to speak to a prominent historian, G. Edward Griffin, and get his take on the history of modern medicine and the American Medical Association. First of all, you mentioned the fact that we got the pharmaceutical industry. We've got a kind of an industry driven by money. And we've got doctors that are really smart people today. Brilliant medical doctors. They're using treatments that really don't seem to work as well as some of these natural things. Why is it? Can you go back into the history of the Medical Association, the American Medical Association, AMA, and maybe take us back 100 years and stair-step people to current day and explain why that is? Because I've heard you talk about this in the past, and your explanation is fascinating, and I want the listeners to be able to hear this.
Well, thank you for that. It is a fascinating story. It's an important story. And I suppose we don't have time to go into all of it, but maybe the best way here is to kind of back into it, to start with where we are and then go back and see how we got there. Where we are today is that, just as you described, these very smart doctors, let's face it, they're very selective process there. You just don't get into med school unless you've got a pretty good brain on top of your shoulders there. So yeah, it's the cream of the crop. The best students go into these schools, these medical schools, but they're not taught anything about natural cures. They're taught only about drugs primarily, and drug reactions, and the chemistry of this and the chemistry of that. And they have to become really pharmacists in a way. They have to become chemists before they can even make it through pre-med. And so that's not necessarily bad, but it is a bias. And I have come to know a lot of doctors in the last couple of decades since we've been working in this field. Many doctors who came from that layer of education and who gradually and sometimes very painfully had to break away from that and go back and re-examine some of these fundamental issues. And many of them have made the transition, and they speak quite openly about it now. They say, for instance, they'll say, when I went to medical school, we never learned anything about vitamins, except we had maybe 2 hours of instruction on the structures of vitamins and minerals and so forth. 2 hours compared to hundreds and hundreds of hours about pharmacies and chemical reactions and so forth. And I remember there's one doctor, he said, my wife knows more about nutrition than I do when I came out of school. And that is not surprising when you realize, now we start to go backward in time, how did that happen? The fact that these great medical teaching universities and teaching centers are so great is because they've had a lot of money given to them. Where did the money come from? Now we're on the trail. The old saying, follow the money, and that'll take you right to it. Well, if you follow the money, you'll find out that most of it came from the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry knows that if they give large grants to these universities, they have a double benefit. First of all, they have the appearance of being philanthropists. They're doing good things, and that's always, it's good for public relations. I'm not saying that they're not doing good things. They probably think they are. But anyway, that's one advantage to giving tax-exempt or tax-free deductible donations to universities. But the other advantage is far more important, because once you have financed a research project, you now have a first right to whatever comes out of that research. And consequently, you can determine in what areas the research will go. I can assure you that if I'm a big pharmaceutical company and I give a $20 million grant to a research group, I'm not going to be very happy if they start to research whether or not dandelions can be used in the control of cancer. I want to make sure they're going to research a drug that I am working on in the laboratories right now. That's where I want the research to go. So they realize that they can take their own research budget and transfer it to a university or some research laboratory and get a tax deduction for it, knowing full well that if that's what they're researching, that's what the data is going to be. So I don't need to go any further. You can understand when the money is coming from a source which has a vested interest in the outcome. Now what's going to happen is the outcome is going to be what the donor wants it to be, generally. So this is the problem, and that goes back even further in time to the turn of the last century, when the Rockefeller Group and the Carnegie Group actually came together, and they decided that they would reform medical education in America.
This sounded like an altruistic plan to reform medical school education. But could there be a more insidious purpose behind the whole thing?
At the time of the late 1800s, early 1900s, 20th century, medical schools taught a lot of different things. There were homeopathic medical schools, there were naturopathic schools, there were eclectic herbal type medicine schools, and so it was all there. There was not one way. And what happened was that the Rockefeller and Carnegie foundations were interested in establishing the one way. How would they do that? Well, they would get a hold of the education system and create a medical monopoly via basically eliminating all competition to patent petrochemical medical education. That's the Flexner Report of 1910, it became known. Abraham and Simon Flexner, were hired to do this. It was a preordained commissioned report.
Not surprisingly, the basis of the report was that it was far too easy to start a medical school and that most schools were not teaching sound medicine. Let me translate this for you. These natural health colleges were not pushing enough chemical drugs manufactured by who? Carnegie and Rockefeller. The AMA, who were evaluating the various medical colleges, made it their job to target and shut down the larger respected homeopathic colleges. Carnegie and Rockefeller began to immediately shower hundreds of millions of dollars on these medical schools that were teaching drug-intensive medicine.
Oh, by the way, when they donated the money, the donors would say, well, now we've given you a lot of money and we know you're going to do the right thing with it, but would you object if if we had someone from our staff appointed to your board of directors, just to make sure that just to see how our money is being spent, you know. Well, that was really a condition of getting the money, so you know the university said, well, that would be fine. Anybody that you would suggest would be, I'm sure, more than adequate. So they began to load up the boards of directors of these teaching centers with people who literally were on the payroll of the donors. So once that was in place, the curriculum of the universities, the teaching centers, swung completely in the direction of pharmaceutical drugs, and it has remained that way ever since.
Predictably, those schools that had the financing churned out the better doctors. Oh, wait a minute. Or should I say, the more recognized doctors. In return for the financing, the schools were required to continue teaching course material that was exclusively drug-oriented, with no emphasis on natural medicine. By 1925, over 10,000 herbalists were out of business. By 1940, over 1,500 chiropractors would be prosecuted for practicing quackery. The 22 homeopathic medical schools that flourished in the 1900s dwindled down to just 2 by 1923. By 1950, all the schools teaching homeopathy were closed. In the end, if a physician did not graduate from a Flexner-approved medical school and receive an MD degree, then he or she could not find a job anywhere. This is why today MDs are so heavily biased towards synthetic drug therapy and know little about nutrition, if anything.
Now this whole medical field has been skewed in the direction of pharmaceutical drugs which can be patented and produce great profits for the producers. And then the next step is that means that anything coming from nature is excluded, and that's where we think, some of us think, that most of the promise lies in these very complex substances found in herbs and plants and trees and things like that, seeds. Some of us feel that it was probably meant to be that way, you know. And so you come out of all of this analysis and all of this history with the realization that the medical profession is really like a lapdog of the pharmaceutical industry. And most of the doctors have no idea that that's the case. They don't understand this history.
Wow, what an awesome history lesson. Now we're beginning to connect the dots, aren't we, about modern medicine. It's a business. Listen to what Dr. Patrick Quillen has to say.
We have to admit that healthcare is a business in America. And while we would all hope that all hospitals and all clinicians are working feverishly to get the patient well, in fact, there are vested interests in this business of healthcare. It's a $2.7 trillion a year medical industrial complex we have in America. That's 1 out of 7 healthcare dollars are spent. And one might argue that a lot of that has nothing to do with health or care or prevention. That much of it is symptom management, using drugs and surgery to manage symptoms. Patient comes in with a list of problems and symptoms and pain. The doctor has 7 minutes to review the symptoms and prescribe a drug and move on to the next patient.
Okay, well, here's a pill for your blood pressure, and here's a pill for your cholesterol, and here's a pill for your back pain, and I'll see you in a month and we'll see if you're maintaining your disease. And that's what doctors do. They maintain a person's illness. They're not making them better. I mean, what are you doing? That is like not okay. You're supposed to create optimal health in people. That's your job. Doctor means to teach. Why aren't you teaching your patients how to turn their life around?
So one other thing I'd like to say is that, even with our Hippocratic Oath, which most physicians have never read, the first thing it says, first do no harm, right? And we have to always go back and saying, well, are we doing harm, number one? Number two is it also says, just further down in the Hippocratic Oath, is I will not give a poison, a deadly poison. And most of the drugs that we give, particularly in oncological care, has a black box warning, which means that more people often end up in the black box from taking it. So you can take this sort of treatment, you might get immediate results, but you also can have another cancer, or have a severe reaction, or have a life-threatening illness from that treatment. So just from that itself, almost everything that we do in oncology, I go back to my oath and saying, well, I look at everything, even if it's an herb, I still challenge it. I go, is this going to cause harm or not? And if it does, then we have to look at other options available.
When we graduate from medical school, we take the Hippocratic Oath, which says in part, above all, do no harm. And I can tell you, a lot of conventional therapies are harmful and toxic to the body, and they don't prolong life or improve the quality of life. So I'm not quite sure how we've gotten stuck into this rat hole, but I think we've gotten stuck into it from, well, as you mentioned, what I've written about, that cancer industrial complex that's set up to sort of feed itself with more and more money that it needs.
Dr. Brownstein mentioned the cancer industrial complex. He also mentioned that conventional therapies are more harmful to the body than they are helpful. Could this be? Could it possibly be so? What were cancer rates 100 years ago? Do you have any idea? I wanted to talk to Burton Goldberg, also known as the voice of alternative medicine, who is featured in Suzanne Summers' book, Knockout.
When my daddy was born in 1900, 1 in 33 Americans had cancer of any kind, shape, or form. When I was born in 1926, cancer was the 10th cause of death in children. Today, it's the first cause of death, before accidents. What's going on? There's a Holocaust. It's not a question of will I have cancer, it's a question of when. And the oncologists are keeping their mouths shut. They use the chemo, they use the radiation, and radiation causes cancer. Mammograms cause cancer. We know that. Medical research, the medical journals prove it, and yet they still do it. Whereas thermography and ultrasound can be very beneficial without the violent side effects of annual mammograms. And squeezing the breast. Guess what happens if there's a tumor there? You're squeezing it through the body. It's insanity.
Spread it.
So the medical profession, in my opinion, is as corrupt as any third world nation. And this country is allowing it. And the reason it's allowing it is because subsequent to the Roosevelt administration, the agencies that were designed to protect humanity are protecting the industry they're supposed to protect us from.
Wow, did you hear that last statement from Burton Goldberg? The agencies that are supposed to be protecting humanity are now protecting the industries that they should be protecting us from? What about the FDA? Are they a member of that group that Burton's talking about? I mean, isn't the FDA supposed to protect us from food and drugs that are tainted? I traveled to Houston, Texas to talk to Dr. Stanislaw Brzezinski, who's been heavily persecuted by the Texas Medical Board and the FDA. In this next clip, he talks about how they retroactively changed the law to entrap him, to make it appear that he was actually breaking the law when, in reality, the law wasn't even in place at the time.
They went after us, okay? They began to harass us, okay, obviously, and they wanted to get rid of us, okay? Because obviously, after they found that we have something which works, it became a serious threat to Big Pharma. Absolutely. Also, there were clients of the Big Pharma, okay? Why they would introduce the law which would say, this is only big pharmaceutical company with unlimited resources is allowed to do it, okay? Obviously, it shows whom they serve. They don't serve American people. They serve Big Pharma. Perhaps some investigative reporter can really deal with them and prove the corruption and clear this up, because something cannot exist in this type of thing. They are suffocating research. They are working against medical researchers. Because of them, many people are dying. And these are the guys who really should be the guardians what is good in medicine. So I would call it Sovietization of the United States. So they borrowed the idea from Comrade Stalin, how to really restrict freedom of the people.
The Sovietization of the United States, spoken by a man who immigrated from a communist country? I mean, the FDA should be protecting what's good. I agree with Dr. Brzezinski, but are they really? In September 2014, I was privileged to attend the Sacred Fire of Liberty Gala in Washington, D.C., and I met up with Jonathan Emord, who's an attorney. He's known as the FDA Dragon Slayer, and I got his opinion on this very important topic. Now, this was an impromptu interview. The sound's not really all that great. There was a band playing in the background, so we've closed captioned it for you. I recently interviewed Dr. Stanislaw Brzezinski in Houston. He talked about the way that he's been just attacked by the FDA. Why is it that the FDA goes after people that are using natural treatments for cancer, but they openly admit that on their own website that their approved drugs kill 100,000 people a year? What's the disconnect?
Well, there's nothing more disgusting, frankly, but certainly a gross abuse of individual liberty to have the government stand in the way of your access when you're dying to a experimental treatment that could save your life. It really is amazing to me that in a land that was supposed to be dedicated first and foremost to individual liberty, that you could have a government, our own, standing in the way of people who desperately need an alternative to failed conventional treatments. And that's what our government does.
Yeah.
It's a travesty. And it's really, when you think of the number of people who have died or have suffered immeasurably because of it, we want to hold those responsible to account, and yet they're protected by sovereign immunity from being prosecuted, despite the fact that they are very directly responsible for taking the lives of these people by denying them the freedom to choose an alternative that works for them.
Denying the people the right to choose a treatment that works for them. This shouldn't be happening in America today, but it is. Right down the road from my house is a food scientist named Mike Adams. He's also known as the Health Ranger. Let's see what he has to say about the topic of censorship and the FDA's official position on supplements.
There is a system of censorship of nutritional knowledge. There is a system that's trying to extinguish indigenous knowledge of anti-cancer herbs and medicines, foods, and nutrition. And the predominant messages that we are told in society today is that foods cannot be medicine. That's what they claim.
Exactly.
That there's no such thing as medicinal herbs. The FDA's official position is that there's no such thing as a dietary supplement that has any effect on preventing or treating disease. Their position is that you are not a complete human being unless you have interventionist chemical medicine or vaccines.
Right.
You must be injected, you must be dosed with medications to be a complete human being. That message is the antithesis of the natural world. It is the antithesis of natural living and holistic medicine, holistic healing. We, Ty, we are spontaneous self-healing beings. We are programmed from the day we're born to heal ourselves if we give our bodies the right nutrients and don't poison ourselves with dangerous toxins. Most of the so-called success that they would claim in radiotherapy treatments or chemotherapy treatments is based on shrinking a tumor. Well, but most of these tumors have cancer stem cells. So you shrink the other cells in the tumor, you physically reduce the size of the tumor. This is a symptomatic difference. It doesn't kill the stem cells that are going to grow back and spread the cancer throughout the body. You haven't addressed the systemic problem. And what you've even done is you've weakened the immune system's ability to deal with other cancers.
Right.
Chemotherapy also damages the brain. It causes chemo brain. It's a common term. Every oncologist knows this is the case. It damages the kidneys. It damages the liver. So what you're doing is, with chemotherapy, you are creating systemic damage to the body's ability to heal itself and to remove toxins. This is why cancer treatments cause cancer, which feeds into the profit cycle of the cancer industry, which is a for-profit industry. The cancer industry is exploding.
Well, the first thing I would say is follow the money. Right? With any kind of investigative journalism, they would say the first thing is to follow the money. And so if they look at, what is the biggest industry right now is the cancer care industry. So when the average 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women in their lifetime in the U.S. now will have cancer, it's an epidemic. So you can watch television tonight and you can see a commercial say go to the Caribbean and then go on a nice cruise, or go to some resort with your child, and the next following commercial will be go to this cancer hospital for your treatment. And that 20 years ago that would be absurd, almost shocking or taboo to talk about cancer on television, and now we're offering it as, oh, well, if you get something, you can go to this place versus that place. So there's something that's gone askew, and now since cancer is so prevalent, it becomes a common aspect where people think, well, I can just, when I get it, I can just go to this place and check in for a while. But unfortunately, most people don't check out, right? And so we have to look at why is this occurring so commonly, and why in the rest of the world it's occurring a lot less frequently.
Big Pharma, the Flexner Report, FDA raids, censorship of knowledge. We're starting to get the picture that not everything is as it appears today. But let's take a step back and let's begin to ask the question, what is cancer? Now, if you ask the common person on the street what is cancer, they'd probably say it's a tumor. But is it really? So I hit the road for Amarillo, Texas to talk to Dr. Roby Mitchell. Then I went to Atlanta to interview Dr. Veronique Desaulniers, and then to New York City to speak with Dr. Linda Isaacs. And then finally to Los Angeles to speak to G. Edward Griffin again. I wanted to ask them all the same question. What is cancer?
So, cancer When we look at it deductively, and of course the conventional paradigm in the past was that cancer are these cells that have damaged DNA, and it's damaged in such a way that it incents them to multiply continuously. So normally a cell will be one cell and it'll multiply into two, and then it'll multiply into four, so there's this exponential growth. But at some point it will shut off growth, right, and it will just stay that. So your liver grows to a certain size and then it stays that size. Your brain, your heart, all these other cells, they grow to a certain size and they stay that size. So they have a built-in regulator that keeps those cells from growing more than a particular number. In cancer cells, that regulator is turned off. And so they just keep multiplying, 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 multiplying. And because of their physiologic makeup that they absorb sugar, and they absorb sugar better than your human cells, then they suck up everything around them, and people with cancer die of starvation.
So, Dr. V, what is cancer?
Cancer are basically rogue cells that are mutant, have DNA damage, and they've escaped the guard, so to speak, of the immune system. And cancer cells are very smart. You know, once they start developing, they stop communicating with other cells around them. They create their own blood flow so they can have lots of nutrition given to them. They even secrete specific enzymes to put the immune system to sleep. And they create a protein called survivin. It's kind of a funny name. It's survivin, not surviving, but survivin, which prevents the cancer cell from going through the natural cycle of death or apoptosis. So cancer cells resist dying. They continue to multiply. They don't die like normal cells, which is why traditional treatments is so counterproductive and counterintuitive, because cancer cells resist dying, and so they're trying to use stronger poisons and more radiation to force that cell to die, but they're not getting it.
Let me go back to a basic question. What is cancer?
Cancer is a condition where some cells in the body are no longer responding to the signals that tell them when to quit. In other words, most cells that have a purpose for developing, they develop to a certain point and then they stop. Cancer cells keep reproducing, so they keep growing and they can spread to other places. That's what's called a metastasis. So cancer cells have escaped the normal controls for regulation of how big a bunch of cells is supposed to become.
The present orthodox view is that cancer is a lump or a bump. That's the cancer. And if that's the assumption. Now, if that is true, then to get rid of cancer, all you have to do is get rid of the lump or the bump. And hence we have surgery. Well, that gets rid of the lump or the bump. Or we have chemotherapy, which poisons the lump or the bump. So we got rid of it. Or we have radiation, which burns it and got rid of it. And you undergo these three therapies, and if you get rid of the lump or the bump, the doctor will say, it looks like we got it all. That famous line, we got it all, you know. But did they? No. The statistics show that in most cases it comes back. They didn't get it all because that was never the cancer in the first place, you know. If you're a farmer and you see all these little black spots on your corn leaves, and you think, well, those are black spots, that's the disease, and you get the scissors out and you cut all the black spots away, you know. Well, you said, we got it all, right? No, you didn't, because that wasn't the disease. What caused those black spots is still present.
That's a great analogy by G. Edward Griffin. What caused the black spots? So let's go back to cancer. We need to figure out what caused the lump or the bump. We need to look at the cause and not the symptom. I wanted to get the opinion of Dr. Rashid Buttar, so I caught a plane to North Carolina.
Cancer is not the problem. Cancer is the symptom. If you want to look at it from a car analogy, I don't know why everybody seems to understand analogies when we use cars. Cancer is a flashing light on the dashboard. And the reason chemo and radiation and surgery don't work is because everybody's taking a hammer. They're taking a hammer to that flashing light on the dashboard. And
the check engine light. The check engine light.
Exactly, the check engine light. The flashing light is saying that there's a problem with the engine. So everybody says, I can fix that. And they're hitting that light, but that's not going to fix the engine. So my question to patients is very simple. If you took your car to a mechanic and there was a flashing check engine light on your car and the mechanic says, yeah, I can fix that, and takes the fuse out, okay? And says, okay, now your problem solved. Or I've got a knocking in my engine. Okay, well, here, turn up the radio. Do you hear it now? Well, I can kind of still hear it here. Put some earmuffs on. Yeah, no, now I don't hear it. Okay, perfect. You haven't done anything to the engine.
I would fire the mechanic.
Exactly, and that's the question that when you ask a person, the logical answer is, yeah, I'd fire the mechanic. So then why aren't they firing the doctors? Because that's exactly what the doctors are doing. They've got a problem, they're covering it up with a drug to cover up the symptoms so the person doesn't feel or experience the negative, which is the body's own mechanism of information saying, hey, caution, there's a problem, and that's what cancer is.
Cancer is really the symptom.
Cancer is the symptom of a sick body. And you cannot cut a tumor off or shrink a tumor or poison a tumor and expect to stay well and stay healthy, because you're not addressing the real problem, you're only addressing the symptom. And it's like cutting off your nose to get rid of a cold. It doesn't solve the real underlying problem.
Every symptom is the body doing the right thing at the right time. If right now, if I put handcuffs on you and locked you up and came at you with a knife, what happens to your blood pressure? Your blood pressure rises. What happens to your cortisol during stress? Your cortisol rises. What happens to your gut? You start taking away all the nutrition out of your body. You can't even absorb nutrition when you're in a fight or flight syndrome. So all of a sudden, you're nutritionally deficient. Your immune system is shot. Your blood pressure is rising. Now your cholesterol is being affected. Is that a symptom? Is that your genetics, or is your body adapting? Is that symptom your body adapting to the stress it's put under? It's adapting.
So cancer is a symptom of something that's gone wrong in the body, but it's just a symptom. The tumor is not the problem, but so often now in modern oncology, we smash the check engine light of our body. We cut out the tumor, but there's an underlying problem that's still going on. But did you catch what Dr. Major said? Every symptom is the body doing the right thing at the right time. I was asked to speak at the Cancer Control Society convention in Los Angeles in August. And while I was there, I was fortunate enough to speak with Dr. Brad Weeks. He said something almost identical to Dr. Major's.
Samuel Hahnemann, who was a medical doctor who actually was so frustrated with the standard of care in his day, he gave up his medical practice. He gave up his MD. And he went into and formed a whole field of medicine called homeopathy, which is a whole other topic, but it's a very fruitful study about healing. And one of his favorite quotes is that the symptom is a healing gesture. The body is no dummy. If the body's doing something, it's probably a wise thing. It's maybe not a permanent solution, it's maybe a stopgap solution, but like a fever. Fortunately, if the child has a fever, guess what? The human being can live at a high temperature or a low temperature, but certain bacteria can't. So the fever is a naturally tremendously beneficial symptom which can help the child get healthy, which is why after a fever, our language says, I feel better. Nobody says I had a fever and I'm feeling like I felt before the fever. It's been a cleansing, detoxifying process. Now, of course, too much of a symptom can be, if not lethal, certainly terrible. I mean, Helen Keller is a classic example of too much of a fever. So I'm not advocating for excessive symptoms. But I'm saying if the symptom happens, the body should pay attention. And often it's the, if you will, it's the autopilot telling us dummies, hey, you're not doing something right. So cancer can be seen as a symptom, as a healing gesture. What I've lectured on in the past is that where I grew up in northern New Hampshire, there was a town dump. And so we all knew we could take our dump over our trash over to Farmer Jones's back 40. And we'd put stuff there, and we used to go there as kids and watch the bears and stuff. But the fact of the matter is, if God reached down with a big excavator and took all the trash out of Farmer Jones's backyard, and we couldn't use it anymore, we'd go to Farmer Smith, and we'd pay him $40 a year to dump our trash there. And because we could take our trash to these back 40s, we could keep our front yards pretty clean. So if you have a cancer in a breast, I'm saying that's metaphorical. It's analogous to a cancer being like a dump. The body's saying something's wrong here. So I'm going to put everything in Farmer Jones's back 40 in the left breast. And there's a cancer. It's never the problem. It's always a symptom of other diseases or imbalances. And so if you just lop off the breast and say, Mrs. Jones, you're cancer-free, you're ignoring the fact that unless you change your behavior, the cancer will manifest somewhere else.
So unless you change your behavior, the cancer is going to come back and manifest somewhere else. That's exactly the opposite of what we typically hear. We hear, okay, you have this disease, here's this drug and this drug and this drug. But let me ask you a question. When you take all these drugs together, have they ever been tested for safety? Let's listen to Casey Krejci.
Jeffrey Bland gave a talk this weekend, and he's the founder of functional medicine. I mean, the guy's brilliant. And he was saying that he was always been blasted about, oh, your stuff's not double-blind, placebo-controlled, and I only practice scientific medicine. And he finally says, he got to the point where he says to the doctor, let me ask you this question. You'll be honest with me, right? We'll agree that I'm a little bit on the outskirts of what you're talking about as scientific medicine. But let me ask you this question. Have you ever prescribed a patient a drug who was already on 4 other drugs? Oh, of course. And could you point me to a study that showed that a patient population on those 5 drugs? And well, I had this study for this drug, and they said, no, that's not what I said. Could you show me a patient population that has been studied on those 5 drugs? And the answer is, of course not. In fact, I was told by Dr. Scott Hainan that about a study he's sending me here recently that there's a study out that says that if you're on 5 or more medications, it is impossible to predict the clinical response of the 5 drugs. Okay, so that's why it's all a guessing game. They'll give a drug for this and a drug for that, and then you end up giving drugs for the symptoms caused by drugs, and it's an awful spiral. Now, there's a place for some drugs sometime, but I generally think of them as a Band-Aid to get people over a hump before they can figure out how to get their body responding like it's supposed to.
Well, I think the difficulty and the problem with the conventional care that's been given is a disease management model. And the rest of the world has a concept of a disease resolution model. So we can manage the disease. I can always put a Band-Aid on it. And sometimes we need Band-Aids. But by the time we see patients, they're more like mummies. They were wrapped up with so many Band-Aids. So we treat the symptoms very well. And in Western medicine, acute care is phenomenal. America is #1 at trauma. So if you get a gunshot wound, a car accident, you break a bone, I'm going to go to the local hospital here, absolutely. But outside that emergency room, which most people live, we have this concept of, again, disease management. So we treat the symptoms. We treat the symptoms and never going at what's underlying cause of the symptom, the imbalance, or the dysfunction. I gave a lecture the other day at a conference, and then I got a little, feedback that was a little slightly negative from the audience, but a bunch of physicians. I said, physicians, like us physicians, were very much like James Bond. And they go, why? It's not that we're good looking, it's that we all have a license to kill. We have a prescription that we can give someone that either can save their life and also can kill them. And we forget that sometimes that we give things that have actually detrimental effect.
They seem to think that taking a drug and covering up a symptom is a better option. You got a pile of horse manure here. What are you going to do? Well, the logical thing would be take the manure out and get rid of it. But instead, they put a carpet down. Well, it's still kind of lumpy. Then they flatten it. Well, I can still smell it. Now you spray some air freshener here. This is like one drug over another drug over another drug, trying to deal with the symptom side effects of the first drug, the second drug, third drug. And finally, they're like, the person just deteriorates. No matter what you say, when you put a carpet over that manure, you spray air freshener, you put perfume out there, you burn a match, whatever the case is, the problem is still there. You've only covered it up.
One of Casey Krejci's quotes really struck me. He said it's impossible to predict the outcome of taking 5 drugs together. Wow, how many people do you know that are taking at least 5 drugs and maybe more? And Dr. Buttar's analogy of covering up the manure with a carpet, that really struck home as well. So I headed back home to the Lone Star State to see what Dr. Irvin Sawhney has to say about the current medical system and the pervasiveness of prescription drugs.
The system is designed to create chronic disease. There's no money in being healthy. There's no money in being dead. All the money is in being chronically ill. And so the way the remuneration works for physicians, even with Medicare, is that it encourages more drugs to be written. So by design, I feel like the system is flawed, and that's and who do you think's paying the Congress people, money for their next election campaign. Some small town doctor who's trying to educate people on how to lose weight, or Pfizer or Merck. And I'm not picking on any specific company here, but it's just simply true. That's where the money comes from. And that's why, that's how these jobs are created and billions of dollars are paid out to, different individuals. And that's why the system's flawed. That's my opinion. That's one aspect of it that's very easy to sink your teeth into, and no one can tell me that I'm wrong, because it's true. It's just a fact. I mean, this isn't something that's up for discussion. This is just pure and simply a fact.
Very telling information from Dr. Sawney. He says that the system is flawed. But what about the main treatments for cancer today, the chemo, the radiation, and surgery? Is our cancer system also flawed? Let's hear what several prominent physicians have to say about this matter. When it comes to cancer, typically conventional medicine will treat with either chemotherapy or radiation or surgery, or a combination thereof.
Correct.
What is your opinion on the efficacy of the conventional treatments?
So each situation is different, and so we have to approach each situation as different. Unfortunately, in a lot of conventional medicine, like I was just down at MD Anderson, people are treated more like a feedlot situation where, if you have this, colon cancer, right, this is the protocol that we use. If you've got breast cancer, this is the protocol that we use. And obviously, that has failed. Our problem with conventional therapy is when cancer has moved from one place to another, when there is a metastasis from the prostate into the bone, or from the breast into the brain, or from the colon into the lymph nodes, then conventional therapy doesn't work so well, right? So it does depend on what type of cancer there is. There are lots of rarer types of cancers, like the cancer that Lance Armstrong had, right? That was amenable to the conventional approach, right? And he goes on to be able to cheat and win, some races.
And that was testicular cancer,
right?
Correct,
Testicular cancer.
To cheat and win some races.
So it does, and there are some blood cancers, some blood-borne cancers also that respond to the conventional therapy. So, but for the most part, the bread and butter cancers, so when we're looking at ovarian cancer, pancreatic cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer, colon cancer, uterine cancer, once the barn door gets open with any of those, then the conventional therapeutic model doesn't work.
Then went into an internal medicine residency in San Francisco, where I got my internal medicine degree, and then from there went to oncology fellowship time, which was another 2 years. So I kind of overtrained, actually. But I finished that up in '73 and then went into practice in San Francisco as an oncologist with a group of oncologists. After a couple of years in San Francisco, I decided I wanted to be in a smaller town, so I moved to Reno. I've been there ever since.
Okay.
40 years now. First 20 years of my practice there, I was doing everything just cookbook style, Betty Crocker, conventional, doing their protocols just like the book said. Then I began to notice that my long-term survivor list was pretty short, and I began reading the literature that everyone was, that after 5 years of chemo, in their own literature, they recorded only a 2.1% survival rate. So any adult undergoing chemo, stage 4 disease, 2 out of 100 would be alive at 5 years. You wouldn't hire a baseball player with a 2% batting average. Not a real good. So I finally realized I couldn't participate in this act for very long. So I decided to get my homeopathic degree.
All of the drugs that you see, if you pick up the label, all of the chemo drugs says causes cancer. Think about it.
Yeah.
We use a drug to treat cancer that causes cancer, a known carcinogen. How crazy is that? But that's what we do every day in every institution across America. We use radiation. What do x-rays cause? Hello, cancer. And we're using that supposedly to treat it. So, stage 4 cancer in America, survival rate is about 2%. That is horrific. It can't get any worse than 2%. So 2% success rate for stage 4 cancers is beyond comprehension. Patients would live much longer and healthier if they did nothing, if they didn't take the drugs, because the drugs are hastening their death.
Wow. And I've read studies.
Don't get me started.
I think you're already started. I think you're already going, which I'm enjoying because it's good information. But I've read studies, people saying the same thing, doctors and scientists saying that you would live longer by doing nothing than by doing the treatment. And I can't remember the medical doctor that I was just talking to recently said that in all his years of treating cancer patients that he's never actually seen one that died from the cancer, that they always died from the treatment.
Yeah, primary tumors almost never kill anyone unless they're in the brain. A primary tumor can kill you there. But if you give it long enough, the metastases can eventually get you. But almost no one in America today dies of their cancer. They die of the side effects of the chemo. And I shouldn't call those side effects, the direct effects of chemo. Because we call them side effects because they're unwanted, but they are direct effects of the chemo agent.
It doesn't make sense to poison and to radiate and to cut a body that's already sick in the first place. People don't get sick because they have cancer. They're already sick and then they develop cancer. So if you start trying to poison and put these horrific things into a person's body that's already weak and sick in the first place, you're not going to get very good results. And statistics show us that. A study done in Australia, at the University of Sydney, Australia, where they looked at 22 different cancers over a 5-year period, and they found only a 2.2% on average success rate with chemotherapy. Those aren't very good odds. If you cut out an organ, if it's diseased, what are you telling that patient to prevent that from happening again? And so the traditional methods of treatment is just not working.
So I headed to Memphis to talk to my friend, Chris Wark, a cancer survivor.
What's amazing is so many cancer patients, when they're diagnosed and they're told they need chemotherapy, almost all of them don't want to do it. Instinctively, they don't want to do it. They don't want to be poisoned. They don't want to suffer. They don't want to get sicker. But everyone tells them they have to. And so they reluctantly agree to do it. And for most of them, it doesn't end well. They get a treatment or a series of treatments, and there will be a very short window of time where the doctors can't find any tumors. And so they'll say, you're in remission, you're cancer-free, yay, right? We see celebrity headlines all the time. I'm cancer-free now after having a tumor cut off, right? But the truth is, you're not cancer-free. You still have cancer cells in your body, you still have a sick body, you still have a depleted immune system, and it's just a matter of time before new tumors form. And it's really sad to watch cancer patients go through this process of, oh, I'm in remission, and they think everything's great, and they can go back to normal life. And a few months later, they have another scan, and there's a new spot or several, or it's migrated from what started as a tiny lump in one breast is now in their brain, in their liver, spots on their bones, in their lungs. And we know that's from the chemotherapy. It's causing it to spread, it's making it more aggressive, and it's causing secondary cancers in the body.
That
Radiation as well.
Yeah, that was my next question is, do you think that it's related to the chemotherapy?
Yeah, we know it is because of the industry studies. The studies that have come from the cancer industry tell us that chemotherapy is carcinogenic, it causes secondary cancers. There are many chemotherapy drugs that are known carcinogens and listed by the U.S. National Toxicology Board as carcinogens. They cause cancer.
It's estimated by 2020 that 50% of all cancer in America will be medical X-ray induced or drug induced. So we will be responsible in a very few short years for 50% of all cancer in America.
Wow.
And that's staggering.
Yes.
That's a staggering, and the medical society is doing this to us. We are doing it to the people.
That's mind-blowing, that by 2020 we will be responsible for 50% of the cancers.
It's staggering.
Wow.
Yeah.
And especially in light of the fact that the recent statistics from the WHO and the ACS are indicating that 1 in 2 men, 1 in 3 women alive today will face cancer, and they're saying that half of that's caused by the medical system.
Absolutely.
I'm blown away, and I don't get blown away easily. Wow, 50% of cancers are actually caused by the treatments? In light of this information, Do you think that oncologists themselves would take these treatments if they were diagnosed with cancer?
86% of oncologists polled or so said they wouldn't give themselves what they give their patients.
They would not take chemoradiation?
Exactly.
Wow.
86%.
There's a study that came out about 90% of physicians, particularly in oncology, would not prescribe the drug that they give to their patients to their wife or their child. Right? So what does that tell us? Well, it's just my job. So there's a disconnect between the patient and the physician now.
Dr. Charles Majors is a prime example of a physician that was diagnosed with cancer himself. He had multiple myeloma that spread to his brain, and he did not choose the big 3 treatments. Let's listen to what he has to say.
The most important thing, and when I'm working with a cancer patient, the first thing I want them to understand is you've got to understand what cancer is. You're walking in to talk to me or have a visit with me. You have no idea what cancer is, but you're about to do chemo, radiation, right, or surgery, but you don't even know what you're dealing with. And so the first thing I had to do is I had to find out and figure out exactly what cancer was, because if I wanted to reverse this, I didn't know what it was. And so our body's made of 50, 60, 70 trillion cells. Those cells grow and die every single day. They grow and die. Every one of our cells has a cell death. They have a life. They die. They grow, they die, they grow, they die, they grow, they die. Right now, as you're sitting here, your cells, you will lose over 1 million cells in a second. And what happens a second later? They regrow. There's an intelligence inside of you that's more incredible than anything else, that your body heals, it regulates, it kills, those cells die, and those cells regrow again. And so cancer is when those cells no longer die. It's called apoptosis. Those cells no longer die. And they begin to replicate themselves and they grow. So what I need to figure out is, so why would those cancer cells show up? Why are they there? And why haven't they gone away, right? We all get cancer every day. You know, some of the research shows between 5, 10,000, sometimes 20,000 cancer cells are showing up every day. We have an immune system that takes control of it.
Cancer is not some alien thing that was dumped in your body from a spaceship or something. It's you. It's your body kind of got a bit wrong. And if you fix things, your body will restore its health. It's not a runaway train that can't be stopped. I mean, yes, it's a runaway, but you can put the brakes on and then reverse it. And then you see that a lot, of course. I mean, the number of natural cures now are so vast, you'd have to be blind or dumb not to see what's going on and not to realize that orthodox medicine isn't hitting the bar at all.
I couldn't stay in the same path, Ty. It wasn't working. I found I was just using more and more drugs to treat the symptoms from the other drugs. And more importantly, people weren't getting better. And it just wasn't working for me. And either I was going to give up medicine or I had to find a different model to use. And, looking at things from a biochemical model and a natural model to try and supply the body with what it needs so it can take care of itself is really a better way to go.
How it makes me feel is very upset. And the reason why I'm angry is because I feel that at least it's negligence. That's what's happening in the conventional medical care, particularly with oncological patients and cancer treatments. And if you go further, it almost could be thought of as criminal, because we are letting people die unnecessarily. We're giving people a lower quality of lives and lower outcomes, but we're pushing profits every day. This is injustice, and I can't be silent anymore. Everybody has the right, right? You have, it's even like the Declaration of Independence. You have the right for these things. The freedoms. To have pursuit of happiness, and we have to really pursue that. And you can't pursue happiness without health. And what makes more people happy is just feeling healthy. And you can't put a price to that. So, one with the most toys doesn't win at the end of the day. Even though we've been driven that we need to have a lot of these extrinsic factors, it's the intrinsic values that are more important. And so it makes me happy when people feel better.
I know this is a lot of information. I know it's a lot of information that's not commonly known. And I know it's a lot of information that many people may look at and say, oh, that can't be true. Well, the bottom line is, we've proved to you tonight that it is true. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to show you how to take control of your health. We're going to give you the information that you need, the knowledge that you need, so that you can empower yourself with health. I just want you to know from the bottom of my heart that I am here for you, that I care for you, and I want you to be healthy. So we've taken the first step tonight. Let's continue on this journey tomorrow. I look forward to seeing you then.
in 2012, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So actually the hardest part for me at that point is to telling the family. That was the most emotional part, because having cancer in the family for so long, it was almost like I expected it to get cancer. I don't know if that makes any sense. So when I actually did, it didn't surprise me all that much, but the fact that I had to tell the family, it was just, that was my most heart-wrenching part of the whole thing, actually. My daughter had always had a fear of losing me because I had lost my mother so young. So from a very little child, she had always been afraid of losing her mother. And so here I'm going to have to give her the news that that might very well be, you know. It was hard to tell the boys too, but it was especially hard to tell her because she was so fearful of that all of her life. Well, breast cancer is the #1 killer of women of cancer. And I had found a lump in my breast, and I went to the doctor and I had a mammogram done. Then they said it didn't look good. They wanted to do a biopsy. Did a biopsy, and they said, yes, it's invasive carcinoma, breast cancer. It's an invasive kind. And so then we did a lumpectomy. And when they did a lumpectomy, then they did sentinel node biopsy, and 3 out of 3 lymph nodes that were tested were positive for invasive cancer. And one of them had actually gone outside the lymph node. It used to be that it would be stage 4 once it's in the lymph nodes, but they've changed their staging. So mine, actually, from the information they had, that I had 3 positive lymph nodes, and it was stage 3B. And so usually, you know, that's very grave. I knew how serious that was because usually less than 5 years, depending on how fast it went, whether to the brain or to the lung or to the liver, would be deciding factor of how fast you died. So, but what you have to, you know, so this is what happened for my cancer, and I chose my treatment. Like I said, I had the ovaries removed, which was feeding the cancer, which was causing the cancer, so I removed the hormones. So this was very grave, and I knew how serious it was, and so it was very hard for me, even though I had decided to do a natural treatment. It was not easy to go against my physicians. It was very hard. In April, I had this breast surgery. I only did lumpectomies, and they wanted me to sign over the fact that possibly they would do lymph node dissection if they found cancer in the lymph nodes. But I would not agree to that. So I went down to Uchee Pines, which is a lifestyle center, and but I had actually just gotten the news that it was spread to my lymph nodes, which was kind of a heavy hit for me, because usually as a nurse and a medical profession, you know, if somebody has a lymph node involvement, that's pretty much, you're going to have cancer all over the body pretty much. And so it was really emotional to deal with. So, but it took some readjusting because I didn't expect it. I thought it was just going to be limited to the lumpectomies and that it wouldn't be in the lymph nodes. But anyway, when I got down there, yeah, it was exciting. They did, before every treatment, they would have prayer. And someone always stayed right with you. It's such a contrast to our hospitals, you know. It's just, when I got back from the lifestyle center, I had promised my doctor I'd go see the oncologist, radiologist, and so I did that. And I decided against doing the chemo and radiation, but they did want me to get a PET scan. And so I had a PET scan done, which I was very reluctant to do that because of the radioactive glucose. And so I had it done, and I was so thrilled though when I got the results that they did not see any cancer in my major, any organs. So I was really thrilled about that things that I have done were working. I didn't lose my hair. I wasn't sick and throwing up and retching, and going through night sweats and different things, and I looked healthy, and I felt healthy, and I still do, and I'm doing health seminars. And so there's a better way to treat cancer than what we're offering people today. So when I got the results from my PET scan, I got all the children on a conference call. I got Tim and David and Stacy on a conference call, and they thought I was going to give them some bad news because I told them I was going to give them my news about the PET scan. And when I told them, you know, it was almost like there was silence on the other end. I thought, what's going on? Well, I really found out later they were actually crying for joy, you know, because I had given them that reassurance that the PET scan was good. They didn't see any disease going on. And I felt good. I've been walking 2 miles a day. I'm visiting in San Diego and actually doing health seminars, and it's been almost 3 years that I was diagnosed. And so I'm loving it. So I really have enjoyed the journey. It's been a growing process, having cancer, and you know, you hear people saying, "Oh, it did wonders for me." You know, you think you love life, everything that's happening. You appreciate things that are happening more, even, you know, just the simple things. I got to see my grandson baptized, and I was healthy there for him, and just little things in life mean a lot, that you can enjoy them with your family. And so there's a better way, and I hope soon we'll find it'll be available to everybody to find these alternative treatments that actually work for them. There's many of them that do. There's many options that we have the scientific proof of. So when I went into the doctors and talked to them, and they wanted me to do something else, it was very hard to go against what they wanted me to do. But my gut feeling was that I needed to go my own route and do natural treatments, because I felt like immunology, increasing my immune system, was the way to treat my cancer. And if that's what you've decided, then that's what you need to do. And the hardest thing is to go against your doctor and your family, because usually the families are saying, you've got to do this or you're going to die, because that's what sometimes the doctors will say. Well, if you don't do chemo, you might be dead in 6 months. I urge you to go with what you feel is the right treatment for you. And if I can make a difference in somebody's life and help them to be healthier and enjoy their life with their family, it is a mission, yes. Didn't think of it that way, that so many people would be watching this. And my husband said, maybe your test will become your testimony. And it has become my testimony, that my testimony is there's a better way, and you can enjoy life. And just because you've been given the diagnosis of cancer, don't lose hope. You have hope, and God gives you some hope and a future. And it's been an amazing journey to know now that I'm going to be able to, this testimony will go out to the world, and other people will know there is hope. It's not just hopeless. There's hope and a future with cancer.